Welcome to the Society for American Soccer History's SASH session with James Brown, author of Mud, Blood, and Studs, One Family's Legacy in Soccer and Rugby Across 3 Continents. Native of Scotch Plains, New Jersey, who now resides outside Paris, France, James has been the Society's vice president for the past 4 years. Founded in 1993, SASH works to promote, facilitate, and disseminate research into the rich history and heritage of soccer in the United States. You can find us on the web at ussoccerhistory.org and join us on social media with our Facebook and Twitter accounts. If you'd like to join the Society, please visit our website and do so through the Join SASH tab. 2 brief announcements. I think we mentioned this last time, but the Society now has not-for-profit status. So thanks to the subcommittee who pulled that off. And then Ed Farnsworth just posted a rare 1908 Spalding guide, courtesy of some scans from Dave Lang. So please check out that post and that addition to our virtual library. Now back to James. James, an all-stater from Scotch Plains High School who went on to play at Rider University, is a technical writer by trade, but he spends all sorts of time researching soccer, a passion that literally grew out of his own family history. James is a community builder, not only here at SASH, but among those telling the stories surrounding the 1930 World Cup. James wanted me to make sure that I recognize the work of Zach Bogalki, who's been so instrumental in the making of Mud, Blood, and Studs. James will take us through that journey during his book talk, but I want to highlight one particular moment. I interviewed James and his father, George, back in 2016. George is a fine storyteller in his own right, and among my favorite stories that afternoon was one told about a Christmas gift. He's shaking this pretty heavy package. He knew something of weight was in it. And he rips off the paper and he discovers a manuscript, one about his own family's sporting legacy. It was a touching moment. He called it one of the best gifts he ever got. And that was an early draft of this book project, a labor of love that a son gifted to his father. So it's an absolute thrill that we have James to tell us about that gift, not only to his own family, but to the American soccer history family. So over to you, James.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate it. It's been quite a journey, you know, to see where I am today and where I was in the beginning in 2015-16 is it's been quite a leap, you know, and I love the fact that so many of you here have been able to experience that with me. You know, from the very early days in these conversations to finally getting this idea published. You know, it's a very humble and I don't know, it's very interesting when you grow up in a family that have sports figures, whether it's at university levels or pro levels, no matter, you always hear those stories. And often you don't read anything. And so at some point, I just started to say, you know what? I don't want to just hear these stories be passed down anymore. I want to go and read everything that I can. And it was at a moment where I had a good amount of time where I could manage my day schedule as a technical writer and spend every other waking moment researching in every method I could to be able to find out every team, every season, every match that was played, every newspaper article from the home team and the away team, because that gives some of the greatest perspectives of a match, that real full circle understanding. So that was really something special that I embarked on, and I was very, very fortunate. So what I'd like to do is I would like to share my screen. So can I have the ability to share my screen with? Okay, thanks. So we talk about a lot of the, the reasons, and part of these, a big part of it was hearing all the stories. So as you see here in these pictures, these are all the people that I heard stories about for the majority. My dad and my grandfather and the top, and then these grand uncles who were goalkeepers in the Scottish Premier League, in the first division back then. And then their offspring. So rugby internationals, just lovers of the oval game and the round game. So that's what made me really want to know more, but even more interesting and impacting was my son. You see, I wanted to be able to give him a very complete picture of the sporting capability and history. It would turn out to be nearly 100 years. I really didn't realize that we went back that far. So, I had been helping my son with just a Thanksgiving project over here, and he hadn't been to the States yet. And so I pulled some stuff together from our side of the family. And then that kind of sparked this idea of, well, wow, okay, I've pulled together these people in the family, but now I want to do it from a sporting perspective. So I really wanted him to have some type of a booklet or a pamphlet that talked about our family's sporting history. So that's my son, and then that's where, I got to dig in through all of these, great sites, Ancestry, Family Search. These are some of the best areas to go to. And here, what's really funny, if you look at if you remember the cover of the book, this was almost my original cover in the beginning that I had created. And like Tom was saying, when I was presenting this manuscript, or this really rough draft of what I put together to my dad in 2016, this was what I thought that it would look like, eventually. So it wasn't too far. So that's always been great. So I started to talk to my dad, and these conversations were in Antibes, in France, on the Côte d'Azur. So it's in between Nice and Cannes. So that's where, it's lovely weather, fantastic, but I was pretty much, I was just staying inside because I was talking to my dad all the time, asking him stories as I was going through the seasons and the teams and the things that I was finding. I would call him up. Little did he know, I had a huge pad of paper with all my notes that I was taking, but I was also recording him, because that was the best way to get that oral history, get it really from him, directly from him. So, so that was literally a few times a day, often, almost every other day or every 3 days. It was just something incredible for him to be able to dig back and find these memories. Now, even at that time, my mom was very influential as well, because she was able to tell me about the history, with the family on both sides, in the US and in Scotland. Her memory, even though she was suffering from Alzheimer's and soon a form of dementia, her long-term memory was absolutely crystal clear. The way she was describing what Troon was like back in the, in the 60s when they were there, it was like we really were there. So I was quite fortunate to have their input, So I was able to record them. And then as you see here on the right, this is what I ended up with. This is a huge stack. And if you see right behind me here, that is the thickness of all of those documents. I just said it's a shame to go through everything, to use everything, and then just to shelve it and put it away. I really wanted to organize it and give it, make it have more sense. So as I started to dig and I was getting into my grandfather's career in the New York, with his time in New Jersey, New York, in the American Soccer League, I came across a podcast from David Kilpatrick. He was doing Soccer Off Broadway, if I remember correctly. They were talking about the American Soccer League in the 1920s and the iterations that came. And David started to mention an article that he had seen somewhere. He said it was in his office, somewhere in his office, and this was back in like 2016. And I'm sure he's still digging through his office to look through it now, look for this article. And it was actually this article right here that I ended up finding from Colin Joes, who is a very good friend of the family. And he sent me copies of his Soccer Star magazines. So here talks about, you see, David was talking about player right activism in different forms in different areas. And he mentioned, he said, hey, there was this guy, James Brown, and he and the New York Giants went on strike. And he ended up holding out because he wasn't happy with the terms. So as you can see here, Bob Miller and Jim Brown, they were the ones that felt that they were getting shortchanged. So that just sparked my interest. Now I'm like, who is David Kilpatrick? And then that's when I started to hear about more about SASH, even though my parents had been working with the National Soccer Hall of Fame. I didn't know as much as I should have about the Society for American Soccer History. So that's when I started to dig in, and then that's when I came across Zach's absolutely fantastic PhD paper about anything but ringers. And that is what allowed me to, forced me pretty much to jump in with both feet, as I've said for years. He was really the one, what he did, all the deep diving search for information about these players and the context in soccer in the day was amazing. So that's when I started to get in touch with people like Tom, David, Zach, and Brian Bunk. Those were really the people in the beginning. And I was starting to get that tingling feeling, and saying, I'm actually where I belong. Because these people are just as, well, they are so passionate, and I hope to become as passionate as they are. So that was a very eye-opening moment for me. I felt very honored to get to know these people, and just to see the work that they've done. So then I started, once I kept on going, I was feeling my way around. I was developing relationships with people like my friend Dean Lockyer, who's World Cup 1930 Project on Twitter. That's a huge resource for finding everything. Everybody just shares information about 1930 for the most part. But if I was interested in going towards other teams like Brentford, Spurs, you name it, even like if I wanted to see New York Skeeters, there was information out there, and that was really a great resource. So all of these have been fantastic. This is a bunch of these slides got recycled from the presentation that I did back in 2018 in Manchester, and but they've evolved. You see, because there have been new ways of finding information. I've learned that when I'm trying to find people who know more about a specific topic, if they're in Europe, I use Rocket Reach. If they're in the US, I use Spokio. Spokio, I mean, it's kind of scary about all of the information, public information that you can find about somebody. But it was actually some of the best, because if I couldn't get to that person directly, I saw everybody who lived where he was living. So I was getting in touch with daughters, sisters, aunts, probably grandmothers and great-grandmothers and grandfathers. I was bombarding everybody, and I still do. But you know what? I do it with kindness, even though I'm very direct, and it works. And I often develop really wonderful relationships with the people who are helping to get me going and moving forward. So a lot of the information I've been able to collect since 2015, if you see this here, things came from family. They came from online research. They came from my personal trips, going out to see people. Some people are absolutely fantastic in talking to you about family members. I think it's kind of funny. In the end now, I know that my book has an impact on somebody because, within the family, I was actually banned from coming to Scotland. A relative of mine said it in a very poetic way. He felt that one of the stories that I put in there, about concerning our relatives, wasn't exactly the way that it should be. Although there are two sides to every coin, every story. So when you deal with family and you're talking about professional athletes, always remember to have an impeccable trace of everything that you do. And one of the things that I did in going and finding out about all of these players and these family members, was I said, hey, listen, here's the text. Here are the pages of text that I have about your relative or you. Take it, do what you want with it, delete it, add to it, validate it, just be great, and send me back your version. And then that way I have my version, my rough draft, their version, and then there's the final version, the actual printed version. So you end up with three versions, and that's important. So if you ever get in a rut, or you're ever confronted about certain facts in your book, especially when it concerns family, then you'll be able to go back and just say, hey, listen, here's how it happened, here's what I got, and here's how it was published. So, and then we go back and we tweak a bit. And the good thing, I'm with Pitch Publishing, and they have been fantastic in the organization of the book illustration work, getting things ready, informing me as a new author, things I need to keep in check when I'm writing and going through it. I was very, very fortunate, and I came to know about Pitch Publishing. You see, for a few years, I was just kind of sitting on this rough draft or this manuscript. You know, all these notes turned into 80 pages or 120 pages or 150. And then Chris Lee, who wrote Origin Stories from Pitch Publishing, he said, "Listen, I'm writing this book. I'd love to get your thoughts about certain sections of the U.S. Chapter, and I'd like you, if you haven't done anything with the book, I'd like to put you in touch with Pitch, because I had a great experience with them, and I think that you could find what you're looking for." Because I had to compete with the idea of family history, soccer, football, and rugby on 3 different continents, spanning over 100 years. So that's huge. Who can really take that in and make something good with it and have a really nice final product? And I was very, very happy to meet with them and to start planning it. And that was really great. And I also worked a lot with my father and my brother David in the early stages, thinking about text, and then at the end of 2021, that's where I had been talking with a lot of people in SASH, bouncing ideas, back and forth. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And one of the relationships that I had constantly was with Zach. And I said, "Listen, I really love your work. You were your work inspired my work. And so I would really love to work with you. So if you're up for it, let me send you this, this document, and I'd love to have you shred it to pieces and glue it back together for me, make sense of it." Because after a few years of writing this and letting it sit, you can't really see it anymore. Sometimes you can't even see the simple mistakes that are just so obvious to fresh eyes. And Zach has had such great experience, and I just can't thank him enough for being able to absorb everything and then reconstruct it in the way that it would be the most presentable, logically, and to the audience. One thing he had said to me, he said, "Listen, there are areas, it's not balanced enough. So we need to think about ways to, you got a lot of soccer here, and rugby seems just as important, but it's at this level. And how do we get you up there or bring you down here?" So either he's going to have to cut out the fat, and that would have been really tedious to have to go through all that and decide what stays and what doesn't, or just build up the rugby section. So that's where I had an idea in January of 2022. I'm within 6 months of having to publish this. And I said, I turned to my cousin, and he's Peter Brown. He was the Scottish captain, and he is still very, very in touch with a lot of his buddies, teammates, coaches, you name it, even opponents. And I said, "Send me everybody you know, because I want to interview them. I want to get their thoughts on your, spending time with you, playing with you, and your brother, Gordon Brown, but also your dad, because their dad, John Brown, who is my grandfather's brother, was a goalie for Clyde, and they won the 1939 FA Cup, Scottish FA Cup, beating Motherwell. And he ended up transforming into a physiotherapist. after he was retired. So he ended up helping the Scottish national team and the British Lions. So, so I said that would be so precious if I was able to get family and friends who were actually playing on the same pitch and were even treated by Jock or getting demolished by the baby-faced assassin, Gordon Brown. You know, those are just the wonderful memories. And I said, I'll take all the information that I think is appropriate and stick it in the areas where it's missing, so I'll build it up. But then after spending like an hour and a half, 2 hours with these guys, like 5 or 6 of them, they were some of the most interesting, funny, wonderful men I had ever interviewed, you know, or had the pleasure to talk with. And their stories were just, and their personal memories about times with these relatives of mine were so wonderful that I said, I'm going to leave it as it is. I'm going to let them say it in first person. So I just went and transcribed everything, made it look pretty, but I kept it in the same language that they were speaking. So the slang they were using, whatever I needed to give it the most authentic voice. And I hope you can feel their Scottish accents in there when you read the sections, the recollection section. And then slowly but steadily, rugby ended up coming up to the same level as football. But then I said, oh my gosh. Okay, so I've done as much as I can for rugby. I got to do this for soccer. God, how can I not do this for for our guys? So that was, I was scratching my head, and I definitely have a lot more bare patches, bald patches, because of scratching my head trying to figure out people I was going to contact, to interview and do exactly the same thing. So, I just talked. I talked to my dad a lot, and I thought about his career, or my grandfather's career, and what they did afterwards. Were they coaches? Did they work in other areas? Did they live in other places? So going and exploring those experiences post-career, maybe even trying to talk with teammates, obviously not of my grandfather, but my father. So I was able to build up even more, just a bit more, the soccer part, because I was able and to do this, talking with a good number of people from National Soccer Hall of Fame days in Oneonta, the great good old days. My parents lived in Nova Scotia, and he coached the high school girls team. Even people down in Texas when he started the Inwood Dads Club, those things were interesting, interesting moments in our lives together. And I really wanted to get those souvenirs, those recollections from those people. So that was great. And just before I was going to publish it, I sent my dad a almost final copy. So the final copy that he received had everything in it except all those recollections. Everything was cut out. So because I wanted him to have a final surprise, because he had read everything. So I wanted him to get a final surprise once everything came out. And just kind of going back where I was evolving with our time together, with SASH, with the relationships that I've made, the research that I've done. I love every single moment that I've had to be able to develop with people. If you look on this slide, it's family. These were family videos, so they're excerpts from these family films that we had digitized. There was the Soccer X conference, the virtual conference that I organized with my friends in South America, and then people globally in February 2001. That was an absolute nerve-wracking experience, but I loved it. You know, I love being able to organize it and people together. And then afterwards, it was about cultivating these relationships with people, you know, and talking with people. Like Chuck Carlson, he asked me about Ralph Tracy from the 1930 team, and was he actually born in Gillespie, Illinois? And I said, well, it's listed like that on Wikipedia. And then I go to the source of that birthplace that's marked in the notes, and it turns out it came from the original biography at the Hall of Fame. So, you know, even these early foundations, sometimes they get things wrong. And as it turns out, after doing a lot of digging and research, I found out that Tracy was actually born in St. Louis from baptism records that I found in St. Louis. You see, so, and there is absolutely no proof whatsoever that he was born in Gillespie, Illinois. So those are little things that I'm now going into, and I'm still, all of you who know me, and you know, when we had the induction ceremony, the Hall of Fame induction ceremony, opening ceremony in 2018 in Dallas, I did the presentation and I talked about the findings that I'd come up with. And at that time, it was 11 out of 20 family members of players that I had found. And since then, I'm up to 15 out of 20. So where you see these little SASH markings here, those are the new relatives or friends of. And some are kind of, you know, some are kind of still being worked on, like Elmer Schroeder. That's, you know, he's a tough one. But James Gentle, you see, one thing I realized is that his wife died early in the 1950s. His family, you know, it's very hard to get in touch with them. They're actually the Widener, you know, Widener, I believe, University. That's their family. And what was interesting is that one of his brother-in-law was actually the founder of the Philadelphia 76ers. And I learned later on that James Gentle was absolutely passionate in his retirement days as a golfer. He was an avid athlete in general. You know, he went to the Olympics and played field hockey. I found some footage as well as images during his time there. So I actually called up one of the country clubs, the golf country clubs in Philadelphia or just outside Philadelphia. And it turns out there is a guy by the name of Custis Swope. Yeah, I love that name. And the guy is like 90 years old. So the lady at the golf club said, okay, here's his number. Give him a call. So I had an absolutely amazing conversation with Custis. And he just told me, you know, he said, listen, I can tell you everything else about James and very little about his soccer career, because he really didn't talk about it very much. But golf, his passion for golf and sports and he would always be playing a lot of sports with his wife. You know, tennis, golf. They were always very competitive. And there was even another, the godson of James Gentle, who I was able to get in touch with because of Custis. You see, so it's these other ways that you're able to get to that person, you know, to get as close as you can, because there are no other relatives to really get in touch with, but there are the friends. And depending on what their other pastimes were, that can be very, very tough. So, so that's just one story, and there's so many that I'm discovering and trying to rectify, and talking about Tom Flory, the fact that he had like 3 versions of his name, his last name spell, and he was born apparently between 1897 and 1902. You know, how do you, how do you do this? Well, when your parents were immigrants who were not very well educated, and back then you didn't need a lot of identifications during these census reports that were coming out. They were just saying, okay, it's our name and it's how we spell it. And you know what? That name was changing at least 2-3 times until Flory actually ended up adding a IE, you know, an IE at the end instead of just an E. And I love that. Because when I was in the US just about 2 weeks ago, over the past 2 weeks, I went to the Trenton Archives, and I was able to find out, digging through their microfilms, that Flory was born in 1899. And because we actually found the baptism record from a church in Newark. And I didn't find his specific one right away, but his brothers and sisters who had been baptized there. So I had 2 churches to go to and was able to narrow it down. And then we went into that church and found his baptism record. So that was an absolutely wonderful moment, you know, to be able to go into those physical archives. And they were just as passionate as I was. So that's been my journey. And I really hope that, you know, what our family has experienced in sport and life, and even though, you know, we talk about ourselves growing up and the people that we had absolutely amazing times with, and they were essential in helping us become who we are today. You know, it's my high school coach, Tom Bresnitsky, and him absolutely crushing you and making you work harder than you ever have, because it was so important. And all those values that we were able to forge during those high school years, and even in the intercity days as well, in the 1980s, those were really, really important. And I would love to say that what we were taught was able to give me the focus that I needed today. So just so you know what's coming up next, since I had been, you know, I've been connecting with a lot of these families that I told you about. So now we're up to 15 out of 20. And within these families of the 1930 players, there were a lot of photo albums. And I was able to acquire or get access to a number of albums. And, you know, people like Zach, you know, going out and meeting families like the Wood family, having that scanned. I went to Ireland and met with the family of Jack Cole, and was able to initially scan that album, but then I actually found and purchased a second scrapbook that Jack Cole had actually produced. So I have that here. And what I'll be doing is creating a coffee table book, talking about the 1930 team's journey from Hoboken all the way down to Montevideo and back. It will be a wonderful timeline going down with captions, trying to talk about what they experienced, on the way down on the SS Monargo, and then heading to Brazil, and then down to Montevideo, and that experience through pictures. I'm still fiddling, trying to figure out how I want to have it either totally black and white or a little bit of color. So we'll be doing that, and we'll actually be collaborating to do a more full look, have a more full look produced on the U.S. men's national team, originating from Anything But Ringers. Because I just think that paper that he wrote was absolutely essential for understanding American soccer in the 1920s and building up to that team and what we did in 1930. So I'm so glad that he's agreed to work with me so that I can infuse all of these little tidbits and great information, talking about not only their professional career, but also their family lives. What they did as coaches, maybe what they did for work, how that impacted them. Did they have injuries that were kind of fatal? Very, at the end, some of them had injuries, concussions that eventually led to their demise. So we will be working together for that, and building up to the 2026 World Cup. And thank you so much. So the book is available on Kindle and Barnes & Noble, W.H. Smith, Amazon versions. So thank you so much, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, James. Wonderful. Just a quick update. We're in penalty kicks right now, and Croatia is up 1-0. So let's open it up to questions. I see a prominent member of the National Soccer Hall of Fame, and he's leaning in. We're going to give the first question, whether he wants to do it or not, to George Brown, James's father, or at least a comment. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a comment. George.
That book took years off of my life, just answering Jim's myriad of questions. I have no idea where he got the title, but it's certainly catchy. Well done, James.
Brian Bunk.
Ah, okay. A great title.
Yep.
And as far as the family is concerned, the content is excellent. We thoroughly enjoyed it. And it looks like it might, there are, I think it is factually correct. Well done.
It's been just absolutely wonderful. The time that we've been able to share since 2015, really,
Oh, I lost my glasses, so I can't hear very well. Yeah, yes. I was
James, I'm going to ask a question. I mean, this is very much, family history becomes, a region, a country's national story. Could you comment on that, going from the very specific and then building out? Because there are other people here who have family legacies. I'm looking at, Bob Gansler in the middle of the screen, right? What advice or comment would you have on going from the family and then out to the national story?
Well, I think that once you've really been able to collect all of those great family memories, that are just talked about at funerals, weddings, birthday parties, just, regular get-togethers. And then you decide to organize everything and flesh out those individual careers. But then you obviously become interested in the team. And then from the team gets into the league, and up and down the East Coast, a bit in the West Coast, in the Midwest. And that helps you invariably become intrigued as to what it was like to play back then. And you're lucky when you have people like, Zach's information about the league and the influences from Europe, from Great Britain, and the working times, and in the steel industry, and the textile industry on the East Coast. And then as you move further westward, we're talking about mining and the types of immigrants who ended up settling in those regions. There are more Slovaks that were in Western Pennsylvania, and they worked in those mines. So you become very interested in what those influences are and how it affects the league and the sport overall. So I think it just builds out. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, depending on your focus, where you're coming from. So does anybody?
So Croatia has just advanced to the semifinal. Wow.
That's why you
Brazil
turned off your
is
camera.
out. Yes.
So you could yell and.
Brazil is out. I'm going to open this up to other folks for questions or comments. Please fire away. I see Kevin with his hand up. Kevin.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Thanks so much, James. Fantastic to listen to how you've put all of this together over the last 6-7 years. I love the fact that you described some of the challenges that you had in representing the family history and how that was difficult at times, particularly with that one incident that you mentioned, being banned from family members in Scotland. And so I kind of wanted to pick on that and build on that in a broader sense, and just get you to tease out some of the other potential surprises or issues that you had, because obviously dealing with family history, genealogy, etc. is it's a challenging type of history to do. And I wanted to know if you could tell us a little bit more about how you navigated some of those situations where, as you said, you have multiple sides of the story. How did you navigate trying to put together a comprehensive picture where you would get a sense of the real true narrative, if you will, of what was going on in your family story, and at the same time manage and mitigate the possible issues that might generate with family members who would read it. So I'm kind of curious to pick your brain on that.
Well, a lot of our family correspond and exist on Facebook. We're just very connected. And that's a great thing, and it can be a not so great thing. But that's it. That was the first place where I could go to throw out some of these stories that I've been talking with my dad about. And it was absolutely important, because you have the people who you're talking about and their fathers or sons or uncles. So you have grandsons, and the idea is to be able to throw it out, get feedback, go back to the person, like for the most part, it was my dad, and say, okay, here's what I've got. What do you think about this? Are there ways that it needs to be treated, tweaked a bit, so you kind of soften the story a bit. Don't make it so hard or brutal. And then after all of that work together, that's that rough draft that I was able to throw out to the relative and say, okay, here's what I've come up with. Let me know your thoughts. So I kept my draft. Then he or she would come back with information about himself or about his father or about his grandfather. And they would come back with their version. And then I would go through everything. So that is a very secure way of being able to transform whatever story is a little bit delicate into a comfortable way to present it in a family book, because everybody's impacted and everybody's got their word, their say. You're not going to please everybody. But if I felt that I had a majority of who were saying, this is really how it happened, then okay, I'm going to go with that. So that's what I did. I trusted my instincts and I trusted my dad, but I also say, you know what, if all this stuff is wrong, that's on him.
That's great, James. Thank you so much.
And I got the recordings to prove it.
That's wonderful. Over to Chuck Carlson, who has a question.
Can you hear me okay?
Hey, Chuck, how you doing?
Good. Sorry, I'm not on camera. A little crazy with the match going on. James, thank you very much. That was fantastic. I have a sort of a specific research related question, which is when you're doing the oral interviews that you do you ask the same questions? Do you have a list exactly for your interviewees, or do you tailor it to the individual? And then secondly, do you have examples of some questions that have elicited particularly good answers? So thanks.
Oh, well, Chuck, thank you. I really enjoyed that Gillespie adventure. And I know that you and I will be collaborating, when you go back to the library in Southern Illinois.
I will still get those photos to you. I'm working on it.
Whenever. I'm good. I never had a specific list. It was really tailored to the person and their career. But I spent enough time outlining what their career was, having the bullet points. And if I came across specific moments, then I would stick those in between those bullet points that I had, talking about a specific time in their life, whether it was their football career, their soccer career, or their regular career. We talked about James Gentle and him going over in World War II to help liberate France and portions of Italy in the southern, in the southeast of France, and then into Italy. So he was with a regiment that was very instrumental in paving the way for a smooth transition and liberation. Because what I would be doing is I would be going to certain people who would be able to help me verify this information. Like with James, I had to go and talk with people who were on a Facebook community that dealt with that specific regimen. And even eventually going to the base itself and saying, hey, here's the information I have about this person. How is it? Am I off base? Sometimes it's the person that actually kind of builds it up to be more than it really is. That's just the way people are, and they take a story and they run with it. And if they say it enough times, it becomes fact. they're like politicians, right? You repeat it over and over, it just becomes fact. So, so that was an interesting situation that I had to come up with to go against, because I couldn't talk to relatives from James Gentle and Custis Swope, who's 90. He can only tell me what he was told by James. And apparently James had always carried this article, this World War II article that was written about what he had done. And so he'd pull it out of his wallet and he'd show the people, you don't believe me, there you go, take a look at it. It's in printed word, So that was really interesting, but he could only tell me what he knew. So I knew I had to go a lot deeper and a lot farther in these Facebook groups, Army Facebook groups. I even bought a book, it's that just came in, hoping to find any pictures that might show him. And that's really difficult because for the moment I haven't been able to find it. But that's just an example of how I've had to deal with certain situations within, within the structured questions that I had, and then more questions that came about over time.
And any specific questions you can think of that were particularly helpful in eliciting information?
Well, I actually played off of interviews from other people to go back to the original, to the people we were talking about. But, so all these relatives of my cousin, they would tell me all these things. So I'd make notes about certain specific information, and then I'd circle back around to that relative, to his cousin Peter, and said, here's what I heard about this situation. What do you think about it? And it was interesting I wouldn't tell him everything, and I wanted to see what I could pull out of him to get his version, So, sometimes the real version and the version that we've created and that we have moved with in life, day in and day out, that just becomes, it's written in stone. So.
Any other questions or comments out there? I have one last one. Zach, this is very much a collaboration, kind of rooted in SASH, in our society and the collegiality that we like to build. Any comments on that experience and, going forward, linking it maybe to the society and what our aims and goals are, which I think James, not to answer the question, but he's very much a living embodiment of some of the essential things that the society tries to accomplish.
Oh yeah. So, James and I first came into contact with each other 5 years ago at this point, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. It's been a while. And, I think it speaks to exactly what we try to do with SASH, is link up people who are telling the same stories with one another. The fact is for any historian, you're never going to get a full story, but you're trying to get the fullest story possible. You're trying, just like James said, you're trying to pull in all these different narratives and get some, this perspective, that perspective, and weave it all together. And I think it's that collaborative spirit in SASH that's really important for pushing forward what we understand about American soccer history. Because when I first started doing this work, I was an undergrad student. The paper James alluded to was something I did as an undergraduate capstone project. It was something I had to do as one of my requirements to get my undergrad degree in history. And, it grew out of several people contacting me who do this work as well, having seen sort of that pre-publication draft and said, you really need to submit this to Soccer in Society. You need to go present this at a couple different conferences. So I think really so much of this work is, we're building it on the successes of, people like James's grandfather and all of those men who competed on the 1930 team. And that's why I'm excited to tell those stories, is because I think, whether it's that or, another collaborative project that's born out of the spirit of SASH is the recent anthology that came out. We had the chance to talk with George Cusis and Chris Bolzman. I think George is actually on this meeting. But, kind of looking at that pre-World War I history, it's getting those stories out there that's critical. And so getting to work with James has always been a pleasure. I was really happy to be able to bring my services, my experience as an editor over the years to this project. Because James brought so much amazing material together, and I think we were able to do justice to that story in how we, organized it, how we cleaned it up, how we, as he said, how we weave together those different stories. And so I was really excited to work on this project, and I'm really excited to continue working kind of more from the outset in the project, because I came in at a late point on this after he'd produced all of that content and done all of that research. And, I could say, go get more research on this or that. Like he said, rugby was a little bit leaner in that first draft than it became in the final project. And I think, kind of telling the story of a family's history across multiple football codes and across multiple continents, that was the original goal that James brought to this project. I think in its first draft, it wasn't there yet. And so I think just the fact that we have that, that ability to collaborate and that ability to, I think when you build up those relationships, you can also be really honest and say this, that, and the other thing are what's missing. And until you get that, this isn't a complete project. So I'm excited to continue doing that and drawing out the stories of everybody on that 1930 team, because that's work, as I said, that grew out of kind of a love of soccer, that's been there since I was a kid. And, was something where my history, the professor teaching that capstone course in the history department at the University of Oregon said, sure, you can tell that, sure, you can look into that further. And that was the light bulb going off in my head that said, hey, I can actually look at sport and how this impacts society and how society in turn impacts sport. Because I think that's really what James captures with this is a family's integration with, the various societies in which they've lived, not, sort of the immigrant story, sort of how families diverge across the globe. It really speaks to sort of the confluence of factors that drew people all across the world during the 20th century, especially. So yeah, I'm excited to continue taking that forward. And, I've worked with so many of you in one guise or another over the years. I'm, if you ever need anything from me, do reach out, because this is what we live to do this work for.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Tom,
Yes, George.
I have to leave, unfortunately, but would you do me a personal favor?
Yes.
Would you explain to my son what different time zones are?
He can hear you right now. I know exactly what you're talking about. He's like a vampire. He doesn't sleep, right? I mean, he's up all the time. trying to
Well-
slay the soccer history, you know, whatever. I'm mixing my metaphors, but yes.
Thank you.
Why don't we end on that note? I know we're in between World Cup matches, really exciting for folks. I don't know if Derek Gonzalez, I know he has Portuguese roots, so he might be happy that Brazil just got knocked out. You know, other people have the affinity for the small guy, Croatia, you know, being that. But enjoy the rest of the World Cup. James, thank you for joining us here. And, you know, again, just a wonderful contribution to the historiography. And I think, you know, for all of us in the society, even better that, you know, Zach, you know, helped you and others helped you along your journey. So here's to further scholarship and enjoy the rest of the World Cup. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, everybody.